My only recommendation is that all other organizations that are working for the betterment of this community, the so-called refugees, let us come together, put our efforts together, and amplify our voices in the right way. Together we can win this war. On the issue that he has raised, last month we had an opportunity to meet with the Member of Parliament, the committee in charge of security and peace. And frankly speaking, even the chair himself was surprised to hear the issue that we are raising concerning the ID, concerning the free mobility. And he said all these issues are already addressed in the 2021 Refugee Act. It's just a matter of implementation. And whatever you need, we will do it. And after 2 weeks, they were able to summon the DRS commissioner, they were able to summon the Director for Immigration, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I think my brother here was part of that meeting. And they are not even opposing. Actually, they are saying whatever issues that you are raising are already met in the Act. The only thing we are waiting for the regulations to be developed so that can guide the implementation of this Act. Whereby we are hoping that maybe within 6-month period, they'll be able to do so. If not, then we are still doing some follow-up because there is so many actors who are working on this, including Kenya Human Rights Commission, Kituo cha Sheria, Haki na Sheria, and others. So we could ask maybe just all of them to come together, put their efforts and address this issue. And I think it will be resolved.
Thank you so much, sir, for being very articulate. Chance to Ms. Nadine. Kindly give a recommendation to other people, mostly in your age bracket, and are seeking what should they do, especially in their education journey. What would you tell them?
Thank you so much for the question. I would like to say that all things are possible because anything can be learned. If we learn English in 6 months, you can learn on how to be a good and dependable woman. In the society of today, women are now given their values as men, but as women, we can do the possible things to have everything we would like to have. And on the side of education is that education, the definition that I can give it, is the passport to the future for tomorrow, to those who prepare for today. And also a tool that breaks down all the barriers, is also the part of the foundation of all progress, growth, both as an individual and also the society. If you are educated, it means that you'll be a great person, and also it doesn't have to have a lot of money, or it doesn't to be supported. It starts from inside. Use what you have, and you'll get what you need. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that out very strongly, that for you to get anything extra, it has to come deep down from within you. So I think if you're not carrying anything else from this panel, please carry that with you.
For the refugees to understand their rights when they are here and their obligations, but also for key stakeholders to understand refugee management from the perspective of international refugee law and the obligations to which Kenya is a signatory to. We have offices in Nairobi, in Kakuma, Dadaab, Kalobey, and Garissa, Nairobi being our headquarters, but we have a national focus so that we also are addressing migration issues across the country. I have been told to speak about the Refugee Act, its journey, and opportunities and gains in the Act. I want to begin by saying that the Refugee Act was developed to respond to many things, but among them to align it to the Constitution of Kenya 2010. We already had the 2006 Act. In addition, it was also to address concerns that kept coming in this country, and particularly national security concerns. In addition, of course, it was also to align it to other global commitments, including the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework and other international standards that keep being developed across the globe to manage forced migration across the world. The proposed legislation was assented to by the President on 17th of November 2021, and this law reaffirms our government's commitment to protect refugees, but also we know that Kenya has been leading in this region in terms of hosting refugees for many years. Many refugees continue to call Kenya home for over 30 years. So this is a culmination of work that started almost a decade ago to repeal the Refugee Act 2006. And initially the aim was to amend the act, but I think when the stakeholders came together, they realized that the amendments had surpassed the threshold, and so it needed to be repealed. So I'll go straight into the journey, and later I will discuss the opportunities. And for me, the opportunity is actually the act. The act itself is indeed a huge opportunity with so many gains in the act as we'll be looking at. So in terms of the journey, on 10th September 2019, the Refugee Bill 2019 was formally introduced into the National Assembly by the then leader of government business in Parliament. In October, before October, once it was introduced by then RCK and other stakeholders, some of them who are here, with the leadership of the then Refugee Affairs Secretariat, we formed a task force that was to support the process technically, an ad hoc one. And one of the things we realized is that because the bill had been committed to DCANS, the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security, it was important that these members of Parliament understood who refugees are. Because being a member of Parliament does not necessarily mean that you understand refugee protection. So we organized a fact-finding mission with the members of Parliament to the refugee camps for them to engage with refugees as human beings, to understand that they were making a law for people that have needs, people that require services, and people that need to live in dignity. So they went there. Of course, like many of us who have not interacted with refugees, when we were going there with the members of Parliament, many of them thought that Kenya has been home to refugees for many years, and maybe then it's time for them to leave. But once they interacted with women, children, youth, they said, I think we need to have a law that indeed protects refugees as human beings and allows them to access services and to live in dignity. In October to November 2019, the National Assembly, as is a requirement of our Constitution, embarked on what is called public participation. And I want to mention at this point in time that it were as stakeholders, we thought it was very important that refugees also give their voice to ensure that the law that was to be developed also included the concerns and the voice of the refugees. And as stakeholders, we organized several capacity building sessions for different refugees, but also ensured that these members of Parliament were able to sit in 6 urban areas where refugees are hosted, and allow me to mention them. That was in Nairobi, Mombasa, Eldoret, Nakuru, Dadaab, and Kakuma refugee camps. And in all these locations, refugees gave both oral and written submissions. Tukaenda tukafanya kikao 6 ambako nia yake ilikuwa kuona kwamba hata wakimbizi wenyewe wamepeana maoni yao kuhusu sheria ile wangetaka itengenezwe ama iundwe na serikali ya Kenya. Na ni vizuri niseme lawmaking is not a responsibility of civil society, is a responsibility of government, and so it's the government that was driving the process with support from key stakeholders. So on 2nd July 2020, the Act was tabled in Parliament for second reading, and we saw the members of Parliament from deacons and also from those hosting areas, the refugee hosting areas, make several submissions and indeed called upon the National Assembly to pass the law. By then, they already understood that we needed a good law that would ensure that refugees are protected, but also that they are able to enjoy their rights well in this country. Like I say, lawmaking is a journey. So, for instance, from 15th of September 2020, all the way to 22nd September, like several dates, we had the bill included in the order paper for discussion in the committee of the whole House, but this did not happen because of other competing priorities. But on 23rd and 25th of February 2021, the bill was tabled for the committee of the whole House to be discussed by now the whole House. And at this stage, the bill was now, members of Parliament included recommendations that had come from public participation, including those that had come from refugees. And indeed, I want to say here that a number of recommendations that were incorporated into the bill are also those that had been variously voiced by refugees. Moving on 2nd March 2021, the refugee bill was led a third time in the National Assembly, and it was passed by Parliament. On 11th August, His Excellency the President referred the bill back to Parliament, and he had a number of reservations or recommendations that were to be reconsidered by Parliament. Among them, that there was need to ensure that the Commissioner for Refugees is able to support use of local products in the management of refugees. I guess purchase of local products were necessary, including maybe food. And then also inclusion of places of ensuring that they can be used as transit centers, and that is when the issue of police stations, prisons, and detention centers or facilities were included in the law as transit centers. In addition, of course, he also had made a provision allowing refugees from the East African community to voluntarily give up their refugee status and take up other options that are provided by the EAC Treaty and the EAC protocols, of course, thereby talking about integration. Those are among some of the provisions that the President returned. And on 5th October 2021, the National Assembly adopted all the recommendations from the President without further amendment, meaning that even those 5 provisions he had returned or he had added became part of the law. On 17th of November, the President, like I said at the beginning, assented the act, and it was a very proud moment for all the stakeholders. And on 23rd November, the Refugee Act was published in the Kenya Gazette, making it law. And of course, on 22nd February, the act became fully operationalized. That is the journey. Of course, there is a lot I have left in between. There was a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of back and forth. And like I said, lawmaking is a negotiated process. Sometimes you win, other times you don't. So there was a lot of, advocacy work that was put into this process. Sometimes Parliament would have so many other competing priorities, but the stakeholders kept, the eye on the prize. We knew that we needed a good law, and we needed to ensure that this journey came to an end fruit-free. So what would we say are some of the key gains? And I want to see the gains as opportunities. So I won't have a different session for gains and another one for opportunities. So before delving into some of the gains and opportunities, let me mention that any good law is only as good as its implementation. It's one thing to have a good law, it's another one to see its implementation, because once it is implemented, that is the only time then refugees are able to get the gains or the opportunities that are therein. I want to applaud the efforts and commitment from the government in developing and now implementing the new law. We know that the government, through the DRS, Department of Refugee Services, they have already started coming up with the regulations to implement the Act, and also many other policy discussions that are happening. And this is a good move that needs to be applauded, but there is still a lot of work ahead so that we can ensure that there is full implementation. So I will start by looking at some of the new provisions. Nyinyi mnajua kwanza tulikuwa na Refugee Affairs Secretariat. It was just a secretariat. Lakini sasa in the new act, tuko na Department of Refugee Affairs, which is anchored within the public service, which is an important thing. It means that then it has resources, or it will have resources, both financial and staffing, that would ensure implementation of the Act. In addition, Section 9 of the Act has introduced the Refugee Advisory Committee. In the nomination, ama wale watu ambao watafanya kazi kwa hii committee watatengwa kwa nia ya kupatiwa barua rasmi. Hiyo ni kumaanisha they will be appointed in writing, and that gives the group accountability of participation in the committee. And hii committee ndio itakuwa ikipatia CS ama cabinet secretary mawaidha kuhusu policies, sheria ambazo zinastahili kuundwa ili kusaidia wakimbizi. Pia Section 11 establishes the Refugee Status Appeal Committee. This is a clear outline on the functions of the Appeals Committee, which includes to hear and determine appeals against the decision of the Commissioner. Meaning that kama wewe ni mkimbizi, umepeleka cheti chako cha kuomba asylum kwa DRS, Department of Refugee Affairs, umefanya refugee status determination, na Commissioner ameona wewe haustahili, haja kupatia cheti, una nafasi ya kwenda kwa hii committee kupeleka maombi kusema ungetaka kuappeal hiyo decision ama hiyo kuappeal decision ya Commissioner. Na hii ni mzuri sababu tunajua mara ya kwanza kuna kitu pengine unaweza kuwa ulisahau kusema ama haukuwa unaelewa lugha vizuri, huenda sasa Commissioner aka-reject proposal yako. So hii ni mzuri sana na ni muhimu, inamaanisha kwamba wakimbizi watakuwa na option, legal option ya appeal Section 12(9), refugee status determination. The commissioner shall make a determination for refugee status within 90 days from the date of receiving the application. Hii inaongeza siku ambazo commissioner anaweza kukupatia decision. However, the timeline may be extended on reasonable grounds depending on the circumstances of the case. Unajua wakimbizi wakiingia Kenya, mara nyingi ya mtu atahajui ataanzia wapi, ataenda kwa nani, na hiyo yote inaweza fanya muda iwe utupe muda mpaka by the time uende kwa commissioner. So hii ni muhimu sana ili kuona kwamba unapoenda kwa commissioner hata kama miaka 2 ama miaka 3 haja kupatia decision. Within the first 3 months umepewa decision yako, unajua kama umepata cheti ama haujapata na kama unaenda kuappeal. Section 14(5) ambayo pia ni ya appeal inasema ya kwamba wakimbizi si watu wa kawaida, wamepitia mambo mingi, na pia si kama mtu yeyote ambaye ameingia nchi yetu kuja starehe ama kuja kufanya kazi. Kwa sababu hiyo watu wengine tuseme mtu amekuja Kenya, ameitisha resident permit, imekatazwa, kuna fees anastahili kulipa akiappeal. Lakini kwa refugees, kwa hii sheria hakuna fees. Mtu atakuwa akipewa akifanya application for free. Section 21 talks about care for special interest groups, ama vile watu ambazo wako na changamoto tofauti watahudumiwa. Sana sana tuseme kina mama, watu ambao ni walemavu, wale ni wazee na watu ambao wako na trauma. Sheria ikarecognize kwamba wakimbizi wakikuja nchi yetu wanapitia changamoto nyingi sana. So some have been violated along the way. Wengine wametukanwa, wametusiwa. So because of that, the government recognized that refugees go through a lot of trauma, and for that reason, that should be taken care of when they are going through either refugee status determination process or appeal. To recognize that sometimes you may forget to say things, not because it didn't happen to you, but because of your mental health. In addition to that, the law introduced something called security screening. Remember, nimesema hapo mwanzoni maana ya kuangalia tuone kama tunaweza kuwa na sheria mpya. Moja yake ni kwamba serikali mambo ya national security ilikuwa important. So the law introduces security screening upon entering Kenya for purposes of detecting and containing any person who may pose a danger to the security of Kenya, and also those who may enter ama wale wangeingia Kenya na contraband. Tuseme mtu amebeba bunduki. Tunajua kuna wakimbizi na huenda mtu mwingine anaweza kuja akijifanya kama mkimbizi. So hiyo security screening will allow for that. Na pia kuna screening ya health, medical screening, ambayo itaangalia kama mtu ni mgonjwa. Tuseme a few times pengine unasikia kuna polio. Huyo mtu ambaye ako mgonjwa, maybe amepitia through gender based violence, anaweza angaliwa, anaweza shughuliwa na ashughulikiwe before even aende through the refugee status process. In addition to that, the law, kama mnajua sheria ile tulikuwa nayo before, ilikuwa tu inaongea mambo ya designated camps. Wakimbizi walikuwa tu wanastahili kukaa kwa kambi za wakimbizi. Lakini the new act introduces designation of counties to host refugees, meaning that sasa wakimbizi wanaweza kaa kwa kaunti mingi, sio kwa camps. And this is a departure from the camps, and of course will go a long way towards creation of wider social and economic inclusion of refugees and host communities, and of course in utilizing area-based approach programming. Then the section 28.5.7 talks about refugee documentation and access to the labor market. Sheti ya wakimbizi. Ukipewa hiyo sheti, inakupatia mamlaka gani? Inakusaidia kufanya nini? I'm sure nyinyi wengi wenu mnajua ya kwamba saa hii ama before the act, ukienda na hiyo sheti yako, hata pengine hungepata M-Pesa services, ukienda kwa bank unakuwa na shida. Lakini sasa kwa hii sheria mpya, hii sheti yako itakuwa ikikuwezesha kupata all those services. So the act provides that refugees will be able to engage in gainful employment where they hold qualifications recognized by competent authorities in Kenya. So they have the right to civil identification documents, and that the refugee identity card will be sufficient to identify a refugee or an asylum seeker for the purpose of accessing rights and services and to contribute to the economy of this country, including in paying taxes. I think that is very important because challenge ile ikubwa sana refugee wamekuwa nayo ni mtu amemaliza shule, hawezi kupata kibarua, hawezi kuajiliwa, na hata wale wanaajiliwa wanapewa pesa duni. Mara nyingi hata hawapewi kibali ya employment letter. So unakuta sababu hana employment letter, mwajili anamlipa kitu kidogo sana, na mara nyingi ni lazima ujiunge na Mkenya ili utumie sheti yake uweze kupata kitu yote including M-Pesa services. So kwa hivyo hii ni muhimu sana, and itakuwa muhimu because the fact that now you can even access civil registration ni kumaanisha kwamba both at county level but also at the national level you are able to access services. So the refugee identity card shall at a minimum have similar status to the foreign national registration certificate for purposes of accessing rights and fulfilling obligations under the law. Please allow me some things I'm not able to say in Kiswahili, ni ngumu, ni kisheria, so nitaongea tu pahali naweza. Section 31 talks about integration of refugees in communities, and the commissioner is now tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that there is shared use of public institutions, facilities, and spaces between refugees and host communities. That kuanzia leo kwa hii sheria, sasa commissioner amepewa jukumu ya kuangalia kuona kwamba wakimbizi na Wakenya pahali ambako wakimbizi wanakaa wanaishi pamoja, lakini sio tu kuishi pamoja, wanatumia facilities and institutions pamoja. I'll give a good example. In the past, you'd find that we have refugee-specific schools in the camps, which would not have all the facilities and they would not have the teachers. And then on the other side, maybe just across the road, you have Kenyan schools that also maybe are not as fully equipped. And in some years back, we saw some refugees registering as Kenyans and some Kenyans registering as refugees just to access services. So now we are saying with the new act that it's the schools, they will be, schools will be integrated or will be using an integrated approach so that we build good schools for both refugees and host communities. In addition, this of course will address the issue of conflict of resources between the two groups. Na tumeona pia kuna inclusion ya institutions muhimu sana kama Ministry of Education in Refugee Advisory Committee, because now we are saying that services will be integrated, refugees will be receiving services together with Kenyans. So this provides opportunities for enhanced inclusion of refugees in the education sector. But we also see the Council of Governors included in the Refugee Advisory Committee, meaning that those counties that will be hosting refugees also have an opportunity to make their voice in any policies and frameworks that will be necessary in the refugee management. I'm almost done. Actually, in the next 2 minutes, I'll be done. Section 34.2 talks about sensitization of host communities on refugee matters, that it is important wakimbizi na Wakenya ambao wanaishi pamoja wakae kwa amani. So the commissioner is tasked with ensuring that there is education on peaceful coexistence, and that is encouraged. Refugees are also to be included in policy development, especially at the county level, so that refugee matters are to be considered in the formulation of CIDPs, county integrated development plans, and also in all environmental plans. And this is important because you can't have people in your county, but when you're making plans, you assume they are not there. So this is very important. And finally, is the issue of double registration. I think I've already talked about it, where Kenyans and refugees registered, either Kenyans registering as refugees and refugees registering as Kenyans. This has been made a criminal offense, and you can be, unaweza fainiwa 500,000 or 3 years imprisonment or both if any of either the Kenyans or refugees do this. Kenya right now has been having a great problem to remove Kenyans who are in the refugee database or refugees who are in the who are Kenyans. So let me add by saying that, of course, there is the opportunity for the EAC countries, refugees from the EAC countries to take up other different options as provided for by the EAC protocol voluntarily. Kenya has embarked on doing the regulations, and a number of the issues, of course, will be addressed through the regulations. There's an opportunity for various stakeholders to advocate for effective implementation of the Act, but at the same time, like I said, we need to ensure that this law becomes important in terms of refugees accessing the rights that it has provided and also the services, and ensure that we see a change into the way refugees have been living in the country. I wish to end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Director.